Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Chris. And wow, do we have a fascinating story to unpack today? Because Meta just dropped what might be the most strategically significant AI model launch we've seen this year so far.
Absolutely, and the model is called Muse Spark, which is the very first model to come out of Meta's new Superintelligence Labs division, and it represents a pretty dramatic shift in how Meta is approaching the entire AI race.
So let's set the stage here, because this story really starts back in June of 2025 when Mark Zuckerberg made one of the boldest talent acquisitions in recent tech history by bringing in Alexandr Wang as Meta's first ever chief AI officer.
And that deal was absolutely massive in scope, because Meta paid $14.3 billion for a 49% non-voting stake in Scale AI, which is the data, labeling, and AI infrastructure company that Wang co-founded and was running as CEO.
$14.3 billion is an extraordinary number, and it really tells you how seriously Zuckerberg was taking the need to completely overhaul Meta's AI capabilities and close the gap with competitors like OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic who are pulling ahead.
So Wang comes in, and apparently the first thing he does is essentially tear up the existing playbook and rebuild Meta's entire AI stack from the ground up, which is a pretty bold move when you think about it.
It really is bold because Meta had already invested enormous resources into the Llama family of models, which were widely regarded as some of the best open-source AI models available anywhere in the world at that time.
Right, and Llama had become this flagship identity for Meta in the AI space. So the decision to essentially start fresh with a completely new architecture and a new model family called Muse is a major strategic pivot.
And what's remarkable is the timeline here, because Wang and his team built Muse Spark in just 9 months, which is incredibly fast for a ground-up rebuild of an entire AI technology stack, including new infrastructure and new data pipelines.
So let's talk about what Muse Spark actually is and what it can do, because the capabilities are quite interesting and different from what we might have expected from a first model out of a new lab.
So Muse Spark is designed to be, and I'm quoting Meta here, small and fast by design, yet capable enough to reason through complex questions in science, math, and health, which is an interesting design philosophy that prioritizes efficiency over raw scale.
That efficiency angle is actually one of the most striking claims Meta is making, because they say Muse Spark achieves the same capabilities as their previous Llama 4 Maverick model using over an order of magnitude less compute resources.
An order of magnitude less compute is a tenfold improvement in efficiency, and if that claim holds up under independent testing, it would be a genuinely significant technical achievement that changes the economics of running these models at Meta's massive scale.
And when you're deploying AI across Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger, which collectively serve billions of users worldwide, that kind of efficiency improvement translates directly into enormous cost savings on infrastructure.
Exactly. And speaking of deployment, Meta is rolling Muse Spark out across their entire product ecosystem, starting with the Meta AI app and Meta.ai website, then expanding to all their major social platforms and even the Ray-Ban Meta AI smart glasses.
The smart glasses integration is particularly intriguing to me because Muse Spark has strong multimodal capabilities, including visual perception, which means those glasses could become genuinely useful AI assistants that understand what you're looking at in the real world.
Right. And the model also has what Meta calls a contemplating mode, which is essentially a system where multiple AI sub-agents work together in parallel to tackle complex, multifaceted queries. So it's not just one model thinking, but a coordinated team of agents.
That contemplating mode sounds a lot like what we've been seeing from other frontier labs with their chain of thought and multi-agent reasoning approaches. So Meta is clearly paying attention to where the industry is heading with agentic AI capabilities.
Absolutely. And on top of the reasoning capabilities, Muse Spark can apparently do visual coding, meaning you can give it a prompt and it will generate custom websites and even mini games, which shows it has strong code generation abilities built right in.
Now, here's the part of the story that I think is generating the most debate and controversy in the AI community, and that's the decision to make Muse Spark a proprietary model rather than releasing it as open source.
This is a huge deal because Meta had built its entire AI brand identity around open source with Llama, and the open source community had rallied around Meta as this champion of accessible AI that was keeping the frontier models available to everyone.
So to suddenly pivot and say, actually, this new model family is going to be proprietary and closed, that feels like a betrayal to a lot of people in the open source AI community who had been counting on Meta to keep pushing that approach forward.
Meta is trying to soften the blow by saying they have, quote, hope to open source future versions of the model, but that's a very carefully worded statement that makes no concrete commitments and leaves them plenty of room to keep things closed indefinitely.
And in the meantime, they're only offering API access through a private preview to select partners, which is essentially the same gated access approach that OpenAI and Anthropic have been using all along, so Meta is converging toward the same business model.
I think what's happening here is that Meta realized the open source strategy, while great for community goodwill and developer adoption, wasn't actually helping them compete at the frontier where the real value and the real revenue potential exists.
That's a really insightful point, Laura, because if you're spending $72 billion in capital expenditure this year, mostly on AI infrastructure, you need to be able to capture the economic value of the models you're producing.
$72 billion is an absolutely staggering amount of money, and it tells you that Zuckerberg is essentially betting the company's future on AI being the dominant technology platform. So every decision, including the open source question, gets filtered through that lens.
Let's talk about how Muse Spark actually performs compared to the competition, because Meta is making some pretty bold claims about benchmark performance against OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google's latest models.
So according to the benchmarks that Meta has published, Muse Spark is competitive with leading models across many tasks, though it doesn't surpass them across the board, which is actually a pretty honest and measured way to present results compared to the usual benchmark hype.
I appreciate that honesty too, because we've seen so many model launches where companies cherry-pick benchmarks to make it look like they've achieved across-the-board superiority when the reality is much more nuanced than that.
And the fact that a model described as small and fast can hang with the frontier models from companies that have been at this much longer than Meta Superintelligence Labs is actually quite impressive and suggests there's more capability to come.
That brings up an interesting question about what this means for the broader competitive landscape. Because we now have 5 major players all pushing hard on frontier AI capabilities with massive budgets behind them.
You've got OpenAI with GPT 5.4, Google with Gemini 3.1, Anthropic with Claude Mythos under wraps, DeepSeek pushing the open source frontier, and now Meta with a completely rebuilt AI stack. So the competition has never been more intense.
And each of these companies is taking a slightly different strategic approach, which I think is actually healthy for the ecosystem because it means we're exploring multiple paths toward more capable AI systems simultaneously.
What I find particularly interesting about Meta's approach is the explicit focus on what they call personal superintelligence, which is an AI that doesn't just answer your questions, but truly understands your world and your context.
That vision of personal superintelligence makes a lot of sense for Meta specifically because they have access to more personal social data than arguably any other company on Earth through their massive social media platforms and messaging services.
And that's exactly where the privacy and ethical questions come in. Because if you're building an AI that truly understands someone's world, you need an enormous amount of personal context, and Meta's track record on privacy hasn't always inspired the greatest confidence.
That's a really important point because the combination of AI that aims to deeply understand individuals plus Meta's vast social graph and personal data creates a scenario that should make regulators and privacy advocates pay very close attention.
On the other hand, if Meta can deliver on this vision responsibly, having an AI assistant that genuinely understands your relationships, your interests, and your daily context could be incredibly useful in ways that current AI assistants simply cannot match.
Let's zoom out and talk about what this means for Alexandr Wang specifically, because this launch is really his first big test since taking the Chief AI Officer role, and the results will determine a lot about his influence going forward.
Wang is only 27 years old, which makes him one of the youngest people to ever hold a C-suite position at a company of Meta's size. And the fact that he delivered a competitive model in just 9 months says a lot about his technical leadership abilities.
And the approach he took, rebuilding everything from scratch rather than iterating on Llama, suggests he has the kind of conviction and autonomy that Zuckerberg is clearly willing to grant to someone he paid $14 billion to bring in.
I think the Alexandr Wang hire might end up being one of the most consequential talent acquisitions in tech history. Right up there with when Apple brought back Steve Jobs or when Google acquired DeepMind and kept Demis Hassabis at the helm.
That's a bold comparison, but I think you might be right because the AI race is fundamentally a talent race, and having the right technical leader can make the difference between being a fast follower and being a genuine innovator in this space.
Now looking ahead, one of the big questions is what happens with the Llama model family. Because Meta hasn't explicitly killed it off, but the creation of a separate proprietary Muse line definitely raises questions about Llama's future.
My read on it is that Llama might continue to exist as Meta's open source offering for the broader community. while Muse becomes the proprietary frontier line that powers their commercial products and generates direct revenue through API access.
That dual track approach would actually be pretty clever because it lets Meta maintain the goodwill and developer ecosystem they built around Llama, while also having a proprietary line that captures the economic value of their most advanced capabilities.
It's similar to what Google has done with Gemma as the open model family alongside the proprietary Gemini line. So there's definitely precedent for running open and closed model families in parallel as a viable business strategy.
The other thing I'm watching closely is how quickly Meta can iterate on the Muse architecture. Because if they rebuilt everything from scratch in 9 months, the pace of improvement from here could be incredibly fast as they refine and scale up.
And with $72 billion in CapEx to play with, they certainly have the resources to scale Muse Spark into much larger and more capable variants, potentially challenging the very best models from any competitor within the next year.
This launch also raises fascinating questions about the future of AI model development more broadly, because it shows that a sufficiently talented team with enough resources can essentially start from zero and reach competitive performance remarkably quickly.
Which is both exciting and maybe a little concerning, because it suggests that the moats around frontier AI capabilities might be thinner than we thought, and new entrants with deep pockets and great talent could disrupt the current leaders faster than expected.
Exactly. And that has implications for how we think about AI safety and governance. Because if reaching the frontier gets easier and faster, the number of organizations operating at that level could grow rapidly, making coordination on safety standards more challenging.
That's a great point to consider as we wrap up today's discussion. Because the Muse Spark launch isn't just about one company releasing one model. It's a signal about where the entire AI industry is heading in terms of competition, strategy, and talent.
I couldn't agree more, and I think the key takeaways are that Meta is now a serious contender in the frontier AI race. The open source era at Meta may be evolving into something more nuanced, and Alexandr Wang has delivered an impressive first result.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.